Let me start with David here, then we'll go to Annie, Raul, and then Philip. Okay. David, would you like to start?
Okay. Is the mic working? Thank you, Lory. Seems like it's working. Okay, my name is David Dawe. I work with food and agriculture organizations, regional office in Bangkok. I've been working on food security issues in Southeast Asia in particular for the better part of 20 years now. Some time with FAO, some time with IRI, and also in Indonesia. So my brief comments, I'd just like to start by mentioning that it's important, I think, to distinguish between food security and nutrition and self-sufficiency. Food security and nutrition tends to refer to how well-fed and how well-nourished individual people are, whereas self-sufficiency usually is focused around whether a country imports or not. And policies that affect one, that are good for achieving one, are not necessarily good for achieving the other. Policies for self-sufficiency will be far more beneficial to food security and nutrition depending on how that self-sufficiency is achieved. If the self-sufficiency is achieved through producing more with less by enhancing competitiveness and productivity, as we've discussed earlier today, that self-sufficiency will tend to be very beneficial for food security and nutrition. But if self-sufficiency is achieved through trade restrictions, as it often is, that will have much less beneficial effects and may in fact be even harmful to food security and nutrition. In what ways? Food self-sufficiency that rests on trade restrictions has many costs to it. One of those costs is it tends to create a high-cost economy, which makes the whole economy less competitive, even at producing manufactured goods and things like that, because the role of food is so important in people's budgets and takes up such a large share of the wages of low-income people. In addition, in many countries, although this tends to be more situation-specific, trade restrictions can actually increase poverty and make the poorest people worse off. So it can create a high-cost economy, it can increase poverty. It usually has bad effects on nutrition as well, because when you achieve self-sufficiency through trade restrictions, this tends to raise the price of food domestically, which makes it more difficult for people to afford nutritious food, which often tends to be more expensive than basic cereal grains. And finally, achieving self-sufficiency through trade restrictions, even in many cases, I fear, in the medium term, has bad effects on farmers, the very people who it's, who it intends to help in the short term. Why does that happen? Well, in the short term, it obviously raises the price that they get for their food, so that's beneficial. But over the medium and longer term, I think it prevents farmers from being more dynamic and reacting to new business opportunities, changing the crops changing their production to crops that are more profitable. Whereas it tends to, this focus on self-sufficiency through trade restrictions tends to lock people into crops that really are not very profitable. Now, just in brief closing, I think it's also important to acknowledge that self-sufficiency also does have benefits, even when it's achieved through trade restrictions. There's always trade-offs. And one of these benefits is reduced exposure to world markets, which has political benefits and even can have some economic benefits in some cases. But at least in the case of rice, which is what I'm most familiar with, it's important to realize that I think the world rice market is much more stable than people give it credit for. Over the past 30 years, there's really been only one incident where we had much problems with instability on that world market. That was a few years ago, as which you're all aware, in 2008. But that explosion on world markets was actually caused by government policies. It wasn't an outcome of the natural working of markets. It was caused by government policies. And so in that respect, I think governments in the region here need to get together and collaborate better, both importers and exporters, to make those markets work better. So with that, I'll just stop there.
My takeaway from what David was saying is that self-sufficiency is anchored very much on cost. Cost is something you have to actually look at very carefully, and that self-sufficiency as the driver of an initiative can have positive spillover effects on food security and nutrition. He also emphasized the role of governments and how governments can turn an ace into a wild card, which might create problems for other countries. Annie.
Thank you, Lory. Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity for inviting me to be part of this. And I'm with the Southeast Asian Council for Food Security and Fair Trade, SECON, which is based in Kuala Lumpur. We work in 7 countries in Southeast Asia, 7 member states of ASEAN. And most of the work that we do is with the farmers, but I also work with Consumers International. So I always look at farmers and consumers at the same time. At the end of the day, when we talk about self-sufficiency, for us, for SECON, we have been very grateful as NGO that ASEAN government have been putting a lot of effort to increase self-sufficiency of important crops in the region. But our concern have been looking at the strategies or how these goals are being pursued. Because at the end of the day, when we want to answer food security, when people ask me, why are the farmers still at the bottom 40% of the income group? Something is wrong with the way that we pursue. And for businesses, if your technology, your product, your services have been used to boost self-sufficiency, and the farmers are your main consumers, why are they not benefiting? If we look at in terms of their income group, they are still mostly at the bottom 40%. How many of them move up to the next 40% or to the middle income group? So equitable benefit is still not there. So obviously there's flaw in the system. And again, when we talk about self-sufficiency, we always look at yield, production, technology, and technology which look at innovation in a one-sided manner. We forgot about innovation in social and economic models sometimes. And this is sometimes when we look at, is it okay to say put more input, more yield? It's about time for us that we have to look at whether we can move towards circular economy, that whatever we put in, all the stakeholders are able to harvest back and put back into the system to make it more efficient. So looking at this, when we talk about partnership, looking at the model for partnership, that can we look at also the products, the technology that we use at the production. Also, at the end of the day, how are these being consumed by consumers? How do consumers look at your product or the food that is being produced using the technology that is used? So looking at this circular model, economic and social benefit is very important and critical for us to assess that resource efficiency, looking at sustainable consumption and production in the whole system, and not just at one market or one area. So this is for us the way that we look at it. And today we had a lot of looking at the question about certification, standards. Will this be a relevant thing in the future? Will this be a non-trade barrier is the way forward? And it is also not for us because standard can be discriminating to farmers. If you cannot produce meeting these standards, then what you cannot trade, and for consumers, you confuse consumers so much with all these standards. At the end of the day, if sustainable agriculture production become a norm that's in sustainable manner, do we need all these standards anymore? So this is where we stand, and we would like to hear more discussion and maybe from your side. Thank you.
Annie talks about how we should look at production and consumption holistically at the same time, in her words. And she talked about if equity is in place, why are farmers so poor? She encouraged us to look beyond production and look at the social and economic impacts and benefits of each intervention, and to look at the role of the consumer as well. May I now pass on the mic to Raul, Montemayor Raul.
Thank you, Lory. Good morning, everybody. I represent a national farmers organization here in the Philippines. In the Philippines, the farmers are considered part of the labor force. They are under the category of self-employed rural workers. So our federation is actually registered with the Department of Labor. And we also have an economic arm under the cooperative agency. So I prepared some notes, and let me share with you my insights on the topic from the farmer's perspective. When we talk about food security and food in general, as Senator Pangilinan said this morning, we have to start with the farmer. He is the one who toils under the sun and the rain to produce the food that eventually goes to our mouths. So if we want to achieve food security, we need to take care of our farmers. And obviously, we have not done so. Poverty continues to be concentrated in the rural areas where farming is the basic livelihood. Even poverty in the cities is deeply rooted in the rural economy. People move out of the farms to look for a better life, but they end up jobless, hungry, and poor in the cities. When farmers here make more money, they buy appliances and repair their houses. Very rarely do they reinvest their earnings in their farms, where they do not see a bright future. No wonder the average age of Filipino farmers now is approaching 60. It is clear to almost everybody why this is so. We have consistently neglected to provide the basic support for our farmers. More importantly, as Senator Pangilinan also said, we have not given our farmers the respect, the encouragement, and the hope that they deserve. So when farmers start getting better prices for their products, and as a result, food prices for consumers go up, I think we should be more open-minded about it. There is a price we need to pay for food security. If we are not willing to give our farmers the proper remuneration and incentives, we put our food security at risk. We cannot have our cake and eat it too. So what needs to be done so that we have food security on the one hand, but at the same time keep our farmers happy? The conventional solution is to improve productivity so that farmers earn more even with lower prices. In theory, this is correct. In practice, it is easier said than done. Most of the technologies to improve yields are already here, but most of the farmers do not adopt them because they have no capital, they are afraid to take risks, or they do not own the land that they till. So I think we need to adopt additional strategies, and I would like to highlight two of them here. First, let us focus on programs to increase farmers' incomes instead of just concentrating on increasing output. There is only so much that farmers can make out of 2 hectares. They will not become rich if they plant only rice and corn. Let's help our farmers diversify into small-scale vegetable, livestock, even aquaculture production, and even off-farm livelihood opportunities, which actually make up almost half now of total farm income, not only to augment their incomes, but also so that they can hedge against market and climatic risks. Increased incomes will also provide farmers with the resources and the confidence to become more efficient rice and corn farmers. This also means that we should look at agriculture more from the perspective of farmers, farmer families, and farming systems instead of crops and commodities. Secondly, let's put more attention to making our food marketing systems perform efficiently and transparently. Markets provide the best signals and rewards for farmers to produce and invest in their farms. You do not have to prod farmers with subsidies to plant a certain crop if they know that they will make good money from it. When farmers start making money, they will not only produce more, but they will also be able to buy the food, the goods, and the services they need. This will create the jobs for people in the cities, which in turn will enable urban consumers to look after their own food needs. Creating wealth in the countryside by helping farmers earn more money is, I believe, the most sustainable approach to food security, to poverty alleviation, and to overall economic development. Thank you.
Raul has posed some interesting ideas here. I guess in response, my question would be, can everyone be an entrepreneur? Or for that matter, can anyone be a farmer? We know that farmers can lose everything in one storm, but don't businesses go bankrupt as well? So I think we have to be a little careful about looking at these options and seeing what capacity is available in each sector to be able to increase incomes, expand the sources of income, the mix from which farmer families generate income, and improve the farming systems. It's a very interesting item we should be discussing in a while. But now let me pass you to Philip. Philip, please.
Good morning, or actually it's afternoon, I guess. So good afternoon to everyone. My name is Philip Solivan. I'm the head of Cargill in the Philippines. I'm sure some of you know what we do. We are very much in the agricultural area. I almost feel that I'm going to be ganged up upon here, given the rest of my panelists. I obviously represent the most capitalist of the organizations on this panel at the moment. But anyway, thank you for taking the time to be here and listen to what we all have to say. So let me start with the good news. The fact is, basically, the world produces enough calories to feed every man, woman, and child today. Unfortunately, not so good news is the fact that it's not always in the right place. So that suggests basically that there are a few important issues for us to recognize. One basically is in those countries that need the most nutrition, Asia being a good example of that, basically, a lot of the food, there's not enough food maybe grown in Asia, and that a lot of the food is actually produced by smallholder farmers. So it is very clear that there is a need to support smallholder farmers and to enhance their productivity, and in so doing, of course, enhance their incomes as well through technology, credit, better farming practices. The second point that I'd like to make basically is the fact that clearly there are areas where food is essentially in surplus, and there are areas in which food is in deficit. And I think it is incumbent upon all of us basically to ensure that there is an ability for that food to move from areas of surplus to move to areas of deficit. We believe that only 15% of the world's calories actually move across borders. Okay, and so we feel that ensuring that trade is able to capitalize on or to enhance that kind of movement of food to where it needs to be is very important. We also recognize that we understand 500 million farms which are managed and operated by smallholder farmers in the world. And this is particularly evident in Asia, basically. And so I think the dual efforts of enhancing the ability of smallholder farmers to produce more and also raising income, as well as supporting needs of a country through free trade in food, ultimately is the solution that will allow everyone to be properly nourished. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you. Let me ask everyone a question, and anyone is free to answer. We are, of course, layering climate change over all these ideas that have been tabled by the panel. If we were to do that, what sort of enhancements do you think we should be introducing to help, especially the 500 million smallholder farms, deal with the conditions that will be increasingly difficult, not just for production, but also for deliveries, distribution, transportation, access? What do you think needs to be done? Let me cite an example from Mindanao where Panama disease attacked the banana plantations around Davao. And it was much easier for the large farms to put out the money to pay for remedial measures, but it was the small farms that really got hurt. So as we look at climate change, what enhancements do you think we should be looking at here? It is not, after all, not business as usual. Anyone can start, please, if you have ideas. Yeah, Annie, please.
Okay. For us, looking inward, domestically is, how do we strengthen the domestic market or the base locally? If, a lot of government supports have been given towards production, and this we understand that is necessary, but we know that this cannot go on forever. And if we look at this, your disease scenario or your pesticide scenario, then how can we empower the farmers first to understand this, the crops itself, because a lot of the missing link among farmers in our region, when new varieties come in, when something new is introduced to them, there is lack of training or knowledge being transferred. So can we invest in that kind of training and capacity building? That is one. And then the other thing is also, when we look at climate change again, it's not just at production, because as consumer, we're also looking at how can we strengthen the buying capacity of consumers to buy your own product. Why do we have to import, or why do you have to export? We're talking about climate change. Food miles is there. That's why we also talk about produce and sell, linking farmers directly. Food doesn't have to travel so far. That this is the other side of climate change that we also have to address.
Yes, Raul.
Yeah. Well, the problems that the farmers are facing now with climate change are basically the same problems they were facing before this climate change came out. So sometimes I notice people talk about climate change, they look for high-tech solutions, etc. But it's the basic support to the farmers that is primordial, I think. You put that in first, the basic, the roads, the irrigation, the technology, they are not high-tech things. Those are the basics that farmers need. And you need to put that in place so that farmers develop resiliency. And then you top it off with some new technologies that particularly address climate change. So I've been saying that climate change has been a blessing in disguise for farmers. It hurts farmers with droughts and calamities, but it has put the focus back to agriculture because climate change affects food security. So people are now looking at agriculture taking a second look at agriculture, because now it is a threat to people in the cities, not only to farmers. And that is a blessing in disguise for us. But again, the basic solutions that farmers need, they're widely known already. Let's not try to rack our minds with finding esoteric solutions. I think it's there, the basic things that we need to do. And they've been there a long time ago.
Seeing that the role of farmers is going to be improved role, maybe this is an opportunity to rebrand farming, no? How do we make agriculture cool? As we face global warming. David, please, you have a comment.
Yeah, I think there's at least a couple of ways to do that. One is, as Raul was just saying, some of the basic technology in agricultural research and development. I mean, in some ways it's not very high tech, but in some ways it does require a lot of pretty high-tech research and things to make crops more tolerant of heat stress and drought and flooding, and these are really important ways to help farmers. But in addition to those things, I think we need to think beyond that and think about, I mean, one way, again, what Raul had mentioned earlier was getting farmers to diversify their income into different crops and things like that. That's certainly one way will make a major contribution. But going even beyond that, I think we have to understand, it's related to what you were saying earlier, Lory, about, you know, can really everybody be an entrepreneur? And that is, with all the fast growth that we have in the Asian region, agriculture is becoming a smaller and smaller share of the total economy. And what that means is that some farmers are going to have to either move off their land, or even if they stay on it, they're going to get more and more of their income from non-farming activities. And so as people move off the land or get income from non-farming activities, this also helps to shield against climate change, because it, again, just gives more diverse sources of income, some of which are not susceptible to climate change and things like that. Now, the food is still going to have to be produced, that's for sure, but then maybe the farmers who remain behind will have more technical capacity to deal with these things. So there's a variety of strategies, income diversification on the farm and off the farm as well as technology that's resistant to stresses.
You look like you're ready to jump off your seat, Philip. You have a comment?
So I think on the issue of climate change and being able to deal with it, basically, I do think crop insurance, for example, is an important aspect of the farming activity, or the support that farmers should get, because there certainly is certain disasters, such as the massive typhoon that hit the Philippines in late 2014, for which there's a limit. You cannot build some coconut trees resistant enough, for example, to survive that type of a natural disaster. But what is important is that the farmer can get back on his feet afterwards, for example. And crop insurance, I think, will allow them to do that. The one aspect of crop insurance that I think is important for everyone to understand and to appreciate is the ability of the farmer to actually collect quickly on a claim. Because when you have a disaster, in order for them to recover, they have to be able to collect on the claim quickly so they can start to replant right away. Otherwise, if they miss a few cycles, for example, then essentially they go out of business. They don't have deep pockets generally for farming communities.
Yeah, I saw that in Leyte, where many people were waiting for their insurance claims, waiting for their payments, and because of red tape, it had taken a while, and some of them were just taken out, decoupled from the economic mainstream. And I found that it encouraged a lot of mendicancy and a lot of dependence, because they had no options left. If we are to look at an earlier statement you made, Philip, about calories produced, that, come on, we're producing a lot more than what we need. And juxtapose that with the statement Jason made earlier when he talked about calories wasted. Maybe layer that with Annie's comment about how you should look about the producer and the consumer in one continuum. Are there any efforts that you can share with the audience in terms of how this might be addressed, that this excess of calories is not wasted and it is instead properly channeled toward useful things useful to society?
Well, certainly, when you produce, clearly there are countries in the world that produce certain crops very, very well, right? And are efficient in terms of post-harvest infrastructure as well, so that those crops then essentially have reduced, the wastage in those crops is quite reduced. And I think that their challenge is basically to get their surpluses over to countries where the product is needed and there is a deficit. But at the same time, for say countries in Southeast Asia, such as the Philippines, right? I think it would be quite helpful if we focus on those crops that we feel we can produce really well, what we call natural endowment of the land and the nation. So our climate, our soil, the technologies available, the infrastructure available, and other resources available, and focus on producing those because then we can also essentially produce those in surplus and then export those to countries which need that product, right? In turn, it allows us to acquire products that are produced well in other countries for our use here in the country.
Let me ask you a question, Raul. Earlier, Kiko Pangilinan talked about how there's a good role for private-public participation in terms of moving agriculture investment forward. And he used the phrase that the private sector has deep pockets, the deepest pockets to be able to fund this. You have a private sector person right beside you there to your left. But anyway, I'd like to ask you, Raul, is the farmer ready, in your opinion, is the farmer ready for this? Supply contracts, multi-year commitments, and what needs to be done to make the farm, if they are not, what needs to be done to make them ready to get into this?
I was actually talking to a reporter just before this session on this topic. And we have an advisor in our group who told us the market is not the problem for the farmers. The problem is that the farmers are not organized for the market. And if we want, no, you know, here in the Philippines, there are already groups of farmers supplying supermarkets and Jollibee and some of the big corporations. You know. But they start with production. They organize their production so that they do not all harvest at the same time. And before they start planting, they have an agreement with Jollibee or the supermarket. Everything starts with that market, then they organize their production, then they do assemblage, quality control, packaging, transport, and then they are delivered to the buyer. So I think it's a very good sign that the big companies are ready to accept products from farmers, but the bigger job is preparing and organizing the farmers so that they can deliver. The reason why there are traders and middlemen who take advantage of farmers is because the farmers are not organized for that market. So that is, I think, the big challenge for farmers also.
There are always, in any market or any geography, there are always some farmers who are better than others, no? Smarter, quicker, they pick up things much faster. And there are always some who get left behind, right? Maybe they're not as good in mathematics or they don't know how to keep books. I once had a fisherman's wife who told me, don't talk to my husband. The only thing he knows is kilos. He doesn't know money. Talk to me. In a situation like that, Ani, if you were faced with that type of a situation and you want to create regional or local self-sufficiency, you know, trying to get the consumer involved as well as the producers, how might you mainstream a new way of thinking? Jason was talking about how it should be the norm rather than simply a niche. How do you mainstream that, seeing that reality is a slope and not a level playing field?
This is a lot of the discussion we had. I'm also working with SCP, Sustainable Consumption Production Malaysia. Behavioral change is one thing that we have to address. How do we change the behavior of whether producers or consumers in looking at sustainability? And again, even when we talk about standard, we talk about standard of a product, whether it should be class A, class B, but do we talk about standard of ISO 26000 on social responsibility, for example? How many companies are looking at this, for example? Or even consumers, will they be understanding, do they understand what does it mean by organic label, or this is awareness that we need to create. And for a farmer as well, they have to be exposed to the market. That's why we always stress on that even producers, they have to understand who are the users of their product or services. And if this, in ASEAN, unfortunately, we are still at a very, very infant stage to create awareness about sustainability. And this is something that we have to ingrain already in school, whether this is already there. And we are looking at syllabus that is really addressing at water resources, energy, where is your, these are basic elements. We are talking here about, yes, production, but at the end of the day, food is what you eat. Do you even ask where is this food from? Do you even ask who produced this food? These are basic questions that we have to ask as consumers. And only then do we realize that whether we are efficient enough in using the money that we get as consumer and spending it. And again, to change behavior, government also play a very, very important role. In fact, now, for example, in Malaysia, because food waste is so high, we are thinking, how can do we have to look at South Korea that, you pay by weight. The more waste you produce, the more you have to pay. Because then, if we have to recycle your waste, that is money, that is cost. Who should bear this cost? And for those who cannot afford, again, Jason mentioned prices is key. Are we putting so much, like even sugar? The subsidy for sugar is so high in my country, that people just consume, and now, a lot of obesity is coming out. So this is awareness. So changing behavior on the way we look at production as well as consumption.
Before I open the floor to a question and answer, could I ask each of you if you'd like to make one final point in terms of what message you'd like to deliver? Could we use this opportunity now? I'll start with David, and then we will end with Philip.
Yeah, I think while there's lots of important points that I can think of, I guess the one thing I would say is, just investing in basic infrastructure, education, health services, and agricultural research. That's the way to move forward.
For us, it's still empowerment and ownership of how do we empower consumers, how do we empower farmers, and even businesses themselves. And ownership, where do you place the ownership? At the end of the day, who decide what, how, and where? This is the key things that we have to look at in terms of efficiency.
Raul?
Yeah, basically what Senator Pangilinan was saying, give more respect and recognition for farmers and translate that into programs that actually benefit farmers.
Philip?
Yes. I think countries should focus on growing the crops that they are suited for the country and for the resources that are available, and facilitate the other requirements of food in that country through open and free trade.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open the floor now to questions and answers. If there are any questions, Raul, over there in the back.
Good afternoon, Raul Briones, Philippine Institute for Development Studies. There were a lot of insights from this very stimulating panel discussion. I was struck most by what Raul said about the overriding need to elevate incomes of farmers. That is the ultimate indicator. For all of this respect, et cetera, it should translate to dollars and cents, something in their pocket. And the contradistinction is production programs. And I would like to add to David's excellent list of the problems of blindly pursuing self-sufficiency. A lot of it is orienting government strategies and programs towards chasing some production target so that you can meet certain demand irrespective of the price, so that you could avoid imports. So for example, and we shouldn't underestimate the influence of this manner of thinking. Just to cite an example, I don't want to criticize my government's policy, but we have a very excellent contest called Palayamanan. Loosely translated, it's rice to riches. It's essentially a contest where government asks farmers to try to produce rice at less than 5 pesos per kilogram. That was amazing. Unfortunately, they had another criterion. They needed to produce 10 tons per hectare as well. So I thought, wow, can't you just ask them to produce at 5 pesos per hectare? That'll make them competitive with Vietnam. But no, they had to chase after this production target. So the more we reorient our thinking towards a bit more rational basis, I think the further we can go towards a proper designing of agricultural strategy.
Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. I'm Isabelita Pabuayon from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. We are talking about food security in Asia, Perhaps what we are missing is the potential role of a regional food reserve. Can we talk about that a little bit? What's the potential? What are the benefits and costs of this strategy? Thank you.
Is there anyone who would like to talk about the regional food reserve?
Of a regional food reserve?
There is up there, the ASEAN Food Security Stock Reserve, something. I understand it's a very small volume, and not everybody is as supportive, especially the exporting countries are not very keen about it. But it could help, but it's not the main solution, I think, to food security. It's mainly for emergencies. Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any other? Annie, please.
Yeah. And I think from the AFTA and now, because we also have the support from Japan, Korea, and China, who also contribute to our rice reserve. And this is again looking at ASEAN member states. How do we ensure that in each country there is enough stockpile being maintained? You know, if I look at even the role of Bernas for Malaysia at the moment, you know, to ensure this stockpile of rice is again governed by political interests, or now it is in the hand of a private person. So this will change, I guess, the landscape for our ASEAN for AFTA as well. You know, so looking at Malaysia being one of the strong contributor to our rice reserve. So.
David, please.
I think generally, my guess is these regional reserves have had lots of problems in terms of actually being used and implemented. As I don't think they're really that practical of a solution. I think it's probably wiser to focus on national reserves, either held by the public sector or by private participants in the trade. That these will go farther towards promoting trade and food security than a regional reserve.
The gentleman over there, yes.
My question is quite simple. Everyone wants to ensure that the farmer remains in the farm, so he'll continue to produce food to feed all of us. But there is a problem, because to be able to make the farmer remain in the farm, you should have to pay him a good price for his rice. That's on one hand. But once you raise the price of rice, then there's a big clamor to reduce the price of rice. And then the government goes into the importation. So what happens here is that the farmer is giving a disincentive to continue to produce because he cannot sell his rice at a good price anyway.
Any comments?
Well, that is the basic problem that government has to decide, how to balance consumer and producer interests. But let's not forget, sometimes when these food crises come up, it's always very consumer-oriented solutions. So FAO calls conferences, UN, emergency conference on food crisis. But when the price of the paddy goes down, there is no conference. Nobody talks about it. But I was talking to this farmer from northern Philippines, and he said, you know, you go to our town now, and I wanted to buy some hollow blocks, like a bricks for house. You cannot find anything because all the farmers are repairing their houses because they got a very good price from paddy. There's a shortage of hollow blocks. And I remember in 2008, in another town, there was a shortage of meat in the market because all the farmers, for the first time, were able to afford to buy meat. So there is a good side to high prices for farmers. Of course, the bad side, consumer prices. But how do we strike that balance and do it so that in addressing consumer interests, we do not, in the process, penalize farmers and provide them with the wrong signals?
Yes. David, do you have a comment?
Yes, I hear this concern all the time, but I think it's a little misguided. I think if there are as many farmers in the Philippines today, in 20 years from now, as there are today, I can guarantee you that will be very bad news for those farmers. It will be very bad news for the Philippines. It will be terrible. Every country that's growing successfully and getting people out of poverty, the number of farmers declines strongly. This is something that's a universal rule that happens in every successful economy in world history. And so I think the important thing is not to keep farmers on the farm, but it's to keep the land that's growing these crops now, to keep it in production if it's needed. Not with subsidies, and that means, you know, as people leave the farm, it means facilitating the functioning of land markets, but you know, and making sure that especially poor farmers have firm legal rights to their land so that people aren't able to take it away from them. But it's keeping the land in production that's the important thing, not keeping everybody on the farm. If we keep everybody on the farm, that's going to be a terrible catastrophe.
Okay, I just pick up from Raul. When we talk about the income or the price for rice, this is something that we always feel that should we allow a certain floor price for farmers, yeah? Because in my country, you subsidize production, but you also subsidize consumption when it comes to rice, because our rice price is controlled. So how do we now ensure that farmers, if in Malaysia, in rural area, we need about 1,000 ringgit household income to survive? How can we ensure this? That even if there's fluctuation in the trade market, you know, that farmers are able to be able to have this household income. And this is if they are 100% dependent on rice. So the strategies now, for me, is how do we ensure this? Whether there should be, I do not want to compare to developed countries because I would say you subsidize a lot on agriculture for farmers to produce. So this is something that we in ASEAN countries cannot afford to have. But you know, to guarantee income of farmers, diversification is one thing, and can there be an area where this can be improved?
Very good, Dr. Ingles. And then the gentleman over there. And
strike a balance between investment on food self-sufficiency and food security. You know, just to give a more concrete perspective, to feed another 10 million, which is a rate in the Philippines in less than 5 years, you need to produce another 1.2 million metric ton of rice, and that would entail 150,000 hectares of newly irrigated areas. Now, that investment is very, very massive. No? And, but I believe it is necessary, given that the situation now, if we remember, just a few years ago in 2010, China showed its resolve to divert the water of the Mekong. And most the countries from Myanmar to Vietnam complained to China because of the low water level of Mekong and also affecting Chao Phraya and Yangon River. On the other hand also, a category 4 typhoon that just like what hit Katrina, what hit Louisiana by Katrina, may hit the mouth of the Mekong, and water surge can go 200 kilometers inside and inundating with seawater and rendering a lot of area where we get traditionally our rice imports useless for the next at least 5 years. And these are realities that we have to face. No? And I do not know what has...
Can I ask you to please shorten your question?
Yes. I would like to ask this question to FAO. What happened to that complaint of Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand to China regarding that issue of water? And this is something that I feel that a forum like this should be able to tackle.
Do you know?
Yeah, the short answer is I don't know what happened to that complaint, but I do agree with you. I mean, I think that trade is certainly important. You know, as Philip's been talking about, moving things from surplus to deficit areas. But I think it's also very important to continue, you know, that the Philippines continue investing in its agriculture sector through, you know, improving research and development and extension, improving the irrigation systems. All of that's incredibly important. But Philippines, I agree, will be in big trouble if that investment is not forthcoming. It needs to be forthcoming. It needs to be part of the development strategy.
There was a hand up over there first, and then I'll come back to you.
Hey. No.
I'll ask you to please keep your question short and to the
don't
point
worry.
because we have.
This is less than a minute. I'd like to ask a clarification question to the guy from Asian Development Bank on Mr. Lohani. No, because I'd like to know whether ADB is still pursuing the
He's not here.
grains liberalization program, meaning that the Philippine government to liberalize and privatize NFA, liberalize, and we go for more importation. What I'm saying is ADB is still pursuing that program because the national policy of the current government is rice self-sufficiency, meaning that it appears that ADB is not sensitive to the national policy of this government. My question is ADB still pursuing that policy?
Bindu is not here.
Anyway, I'll just put that to ADB because it appears instead of ADB helping the national policy of self-sufficiency, ADB is pursuing in exchange for, I think, $100 million.
I think
Pursuing liberalization, privatizing NFA, that's contrary to our national policy. Thank you.
one of the things we have to remember is that multilateral banks look to countries as their clients. And when you talk to them, they often say, we only do what our clients ask. So there are two sides to that coin. There was a lady here. There. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, good afternoon. We've been talking about insisting on rice as the staple food. With the advent of all these typhoons, have we not thought of root crops as a substitute to rice and give an emphasis on our university in Leyte? You substitute it, don't keep on thinking about rice when you can also get your calories from root crops. That's just my suggestion. Just think about it.
Thank you, thank you. I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, Tony only gave us till 12:30 and we have gone past our time. Thank you very much for your attention and your questions. I hope you found the panel discussion interesting. Thank you.